He sits at the top of the most powerful organization in world football. Every major tournament, every World Cup, billions of dollars, hundreds of national associations, and decisions that can change the future of the sport. But behind that enormous power is a question that refuses to disappear. How much power should one man have over the world's game? FIFA president Gianni Infantino has become one of the most recognizable figures in football administration. His supporters point to expanded competitions, increased revenues, and FIFA's growing global reach. His critics see something very different. They accuse FIFA leadership of prioritizing political relationships, commercial interests, and personal influence over the principles of sporting governance. Those are serious accusations. But accusations are not the same as proven corruption. So today, we're going beyond the headline. We're examining the controversies, the criticism, and the extraordinary constant. Gianni Infantino's rise to the FIFA presidency began long before he became the face of world football. He built his reputation within European football administration before eventually becoming FIFA president. When he took control of FIFA, the organization was still dealing with the enormous damage caused by years of corruption scandals. The challenge was obvious. FIFA needed to convince the football world that its culture had changed. Transparency, accountability, good governance. These were no longer abstract ideas. They had become essential to FIFA's credibility. But as Infantino's influence grew, so did the scrutiny surrounding his leadership. Infantino presented himself as part of a new era. FIFA's finances improved dramatically. The organization expanded its competitions and increased the commercial value of international football. The 2026 World Cup became the largest edition in tournament history, featuring 48 teams across 3 host countries. From FIFA's perspective, expansion meant greater global participation and new opportunities for football nations. Critics, however, questioned whether expansion was always about developing the game or whether commercial growth was becoming the dominant priority. That debate goes far beyond one tournament. It raises a fundamental question: should football's governing body maximize revenue, or should sporting integrity come first? The criticism surrounding FIFA did not begin with Infantino. FIFA's history includes some of the most serious corruption scandals ever associated with international sport. That history created a permanent trust problem. Even when FIFA introduces new reforms, critics ask whether the organization has truly changed, and recent controversies surrounding football governance have kept those questions alive. Academic researchers and football observers continue to debate FIFA's approach to integrity, commercial interests, political relationships, and tournament governance. The issue is therefore bigger than one person. It is about the structure of power itself. Who controls football? Who makes the biggest decisions? And who has the authority to hold those decision-makers accountable? But criticism of FIFA isn't based on just one controversy. There are years of history behind it. And as FIFA's power and commercial reach continue to grow, the questions surrounding its leadership have become even harder to ignore. We'll examine the biggest controversies surrounding Infantino's leadership, the political relationships that have attracted scrutiny, and why critics believe FIFA's power structure remains deeply problematic. To understand the controversy surrounding Gianni Infantino, you first have to understand the power attached to the position he holds. The FIFA president isn't simply the public face of football. The position sits at the center of an enormous global organization representing national football associations across the world. FIFA controls the world's biggest international football tournament. It manages billions in commercial activity, and its decisions can influence competitions, regulations, development programs, and the future direction of the sport. That makes the presidency one of the most influential positions in international sports. But enormous influence inevitably creates enormous scrutiny. One of Infantino's defining ideas has been expanding international football. The 2026 World Cup moved from the traditional 32-team format to 48 teams. Supporters of the expansion argue that more nations deserve the opportunity to compete on football's biggest stage. It creates opportunities for developing football nations. It gives more supporters a chance to see their countries at a World Cup. and it increases FIFA's global reach. But critics ask a different question. Does more football automatically mean better football? A larger tournament means more matches, more commercial opportunities, more broadcast revenue, and potentially greater physical demands on players. That debate has become one of the central arguments surrounding modern FIFA. Perhaps the most sensitive issue surrounding FIFA leadership is politics. International football has never existed completely outside politics. World Cups are hosted by governments. Stadiums are built through public and private investment. National associations interact with political institutions, and FIFA leaders regularly meet heads of state and government officials. Infantino's relationships with political leaders have therefore attracted significant attention. Critics argue that FIFA must maintain enough independence to protect the integrity of football. Supporters argue that international football inevitably requires diplomacy. The difficult question is where that line should be drawn. When does diplomacy help football? And when can political relationships create legitimate concerns about influence? One of the most closely watched relationships in modern football has been FIFA's engagement with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in sport in recent years. Football has become a major part of that strategy. The country's domestic league has attracted global stars. Major sporting events have received enormous investment, and FIFA has maintained important relationships with Saudi institutions. Supporters of this approach argue that football is becoming increasingly global. Critics, however, question whether FIFA gives enough attention to human rights concerns when building relationships with powerful governments and commercial partners. These debates are complicated. They involve sport, diplomacy, economics, and politics simultaneously, and they demonstrate why FIFA leadership receives scrutiny far beyond the football pitch. This brings us to the central question: has FIFA genuinely changed, or has the organization simply become more powerful? Infantino has defended the organization's direction and highlighted FIFA's financial strength and global expansion. Critics remain skeptical. They argue that stronger institutions require stronger independent oversight. The debate isn't necessarily about whether football should grow. It is about how that growth should be managed. Who benefits? Who makes the decisions? And what mechanisms exist when powerful stakeholders disagree? Those questions will continue to shape the future of international football. The controversy surrounding FIFA leadership isn't going away, because the bigger the organization becomes, the bigger the questions become. Can FIFA expand globally while maintaining trust? Can it work with governments without becoming politically dependent? And can the world's football governing body convince its critics that its decisions are truly about the game? We'll examine the legacy of Infantino's leadership, the strongest arguments from both supporters and critics, and the question that may define FIFA's future: who watches the people who run football? But there is an important side of this debate that cannot be ignored. Calling someone the most corrupt man in football is a powerful accusation, but criticism, controversy, and corruption are not automatically the same thing. Infantino's supporters point to FIFA's financial growth, the expansion of international football, increased investment in development programs, and the organization's ability to bring more countries into the global game. From that perspective, FIFA under Infantino has become larger, stronger, and more financially successful. His critics see those same developments differently. They argue that greater financial power can create greater risks, and they believe FIFA needs stronger independent oversight to ensure that decisions are made transparently. So the real debate isn't simply, is Infantino good or bad for football? The deeper question is, how should an organization with this much power be held accountable? FIFA's history makes this question impossible to ignore. The organization has already experienced major corruption scandals. Those events permanently changed the way the football world looks at its governing institutions. Reforms were introduced, leadership changed, rules were strengthened, but institutional trust doesn't return overnight. Every new generation of FIFA leadership inherits that history, and every controversial decision is judged against it. That is why transparency matters so much. If FIFA wants supporters to trust its decisions, it must continually demonstrate that its governance is independent, accountable, and understandable. There is another question that rarely receives enough attention: who actually has the power to influence FIFA? FIFA is made up of national football associations from around the world. Those associations have voting rights. Presidential elections depend on support from those members. That creates a complicated political structure. Different regions have different priorities. Different football associations have different interests. And FIFA's leadership must constantly maintain relationships across the global football community. This can create enormous political complexity, but it also creates an important form of accountability. FIFA's leadership ultimately depends on the support of its member associations. The question is whether that system provides enough independent oversight beyond internal football politics. The future of FIFA will probably be defined by three things: money, expansion, and trust. The commercial value of football continues to rise, international competitions continue to grow, and FIFA's global influence is unlikely to disappear. But growth without trust can become a serious problem. The larger FIFA becomes, the more important transparent governance becomes. Supporters don't need to agree with every decision, but they need to believe that decisions are being made through clear rules and accountable processes. That is the standard any global sports organization should be expected to meet. After examining the controversy, we can return to the headline: the most corrupt man in football. It is dramatic, it is emotional, and it guarantees attention. But it should not be treated as an established fact without evidence proving corruption by the individual involved. There is a much more interesting story underneath that headline, a story about power, money, politics, governance, and the struggle to maintain public trust in the world's most influential sport. Infantino's supporters will point to FIFA's growth. His critics will continue questioning its governance, and the debate will probably continue long after the next World Cup ends. Because the real issue is bigger than one man. It is about the system surrounding him. Football belongs to billions of people. They watch it in packed stadiums, they follow it from small towns, they celebrate victories with strangers, and they pass their love of the game from one generation to the next. That is why football governance matters. The people running the sport may control the competitions. They may negotiate billion-dollar deals. They may decide where the biggest tournaments are played. But ultimately, their legitimacy comes from the people who care about the game. So perhaps the most important question isn't, who is the most corrupt man in football? Perhaps the better question is, who watches the people who run football? Because as FIFA becomes more powerful, accountability becomes more important. And the future of the world's game may depend not only on what happens on the pitch, but on what happens behind the scenes. The ball belongs to the players, the passion belongs to the fans, but the responsibility belongs to the people who govern the game.